12 feet. That is not the width of a room or the span of a small boat. It is the distance between the tips of antlers carried on the head of a single animal that once walked across Ice Age Europe. An animal so large, so heavily armed, that even today its remains seem unreal-like, something exaggerated by myth or misremembered by legend. Yet every measurement, every fossil, every scar etched into ancient bone confirms the same truth. This creature existed, and it vanished. For thousands of years, during the cold pulse of the last ice age, a giant deer dominated open plains, river valleys, and frozen woodlands from Ireland to Siberia. Its antlers were the largest known to Strahd, branching structures heavier than most modern deer's entire skeletons. When this animal moved, it did not slip quietly through forests. It commanded space. It reshaped landscapes simply by existing within them. And then, suddenly, it was gone. No stories were written about its last days. No witnesses left records of its final herds. What remains are fragment skulls lifted from peat bogs, antlers pulled from riverbeds, bones scattered through caves and plains. Each discovery tells part of a story that science is still trying to fully reconstruct. A story of dominance, of extreme adaptation, and of collapse. This animal is known today as Megaloceros, often called the Irish elk, though it was neither exclusively Irish nor a true elk. Its name means great-horned, and it earned that title more completely than any land mammal before or since. To encounter it alive would have been overwhelming, standing nearly 7 feet tall at the shoulder, weighing close to half a ton, and crowned with antlers wider than many cars are long. Megaloceros was not just the largest deer that ever lived. It was one of the most visually extreme herbivores in Earth's history. But size alone does not explain the fascination. Megaloceros existed at a crossroads in time when ice sheets advanced and retreated, when grasslands replaced forests, and when humans were spreading across Eurasia with new tools and strategies. It thrived in a world of instability, adapting to harsh climates and competing with mammoths, woolly rhinos, and steppe bison for space and resources. For tens of thousands of years, it succeeded. Its disappearance, however, raises unsettling questions. How does an animal so successful, so widespread, and so dominant simply fade from the planet? Was it climate that betrayed it? Human pressure? Or did the very trait that made it magnificent, those colossal antlers, also seal its fate? Megaloceros forces us to confront an uncomfortable idea that evolutionary success can carry hidden costs, and that even the most imposing creatures are vulnerable to rapid change. Its bones whisper of strength and confidence, but also of fragility in a world that was shifting faster than adaptation could keep up. To understand how such a giant lived, and why it disappeared, we must step back into deep time, into the frozen grasslands and wind-scoured plains of Ice Age Europe, where the largest deer ever to walk the earth once reigned supreme. The modern scientific story of Megaloceros begins not in frozen tundra, but in peat bogs, riverbanks, and limestone caves, places where bone can survive long after flesh is gone. Long before scientists understood Ice Age ecology, farmers and laborers across Europe were already uncovering enormous antlers buried beneath their feet. These discoveries were so large and unfamiliar that they were often assumed to belong to mythical beasts or giants from folklore. One of the earliest documented finds occurred in the early 18th century in Ireland, where workers cutting peat uncovered massive antlers unlike anything living on the island. Ireland had no elk, no moose, and no animal remotely comparable in size. The antlers were wider than a grown man is tall and weighed more than most livestock heads combined. At the time, natural history was still entangled with legend, and many believed these remains belonged to biblical creatures or extinct giants mentioned in ancient texts. The turning point came in 1697, when Irish physician and naturalist Thomas Molyneux presented a detailed description of giant antlers recovered near Dublin. He argued correctly that these remains did not belong to modern elk or moose, but to an unknown species of enormous deer that once lived in Ireland. This claim was controversial. The idea of extinction itself was still widely rejected in Europe. Many scholars believed God would not allow entire species to vanish. That as more discoveries followed across Britain, Germany, France, and Eastern Europe, skepticism became impossible to maintain. By the late 18th century, naturalists, including Georges Cuvier, used comparative anatomy to demonstrate that these fossils represented a distinct, extinct species. Cuvier's work on fossil mammals helped establish extinction as a scientific reality, and Megaloceros became one of the most powerful examples supporting that idea. Early reconstructions, however, were deeply flawed. Some scientists imagined Megaloceros as a slow, forest-dwelling animal, clumsily dragging its antlers through dense trees. Others reconstructed it as a swamp-bound creature, weighed down by its own anatomy. These assumptions were based more on intuition than evidence, and they shaped public perception for decades. Geological context slowly corrected the picture. Fossils were not confined to forests or bogs, but appeared in open grassland sediments, river terraces, and steppe environments. Radiocarbon dating later confirmed that Megaloceros thrived during cold stripe periods when Europe was dominated by open plains rather than dense woodland. Its antlers, once thought to be a liability, were increasingly understood as tools shaped by sexual selection and open habitats. Today, thousands of Megaloceros fossils are known, ranging from isolated antlers to nearly complete skeletons. Major collections are held in institutions such as the Natural History Museum in London, the National Museum of Ireland, the Muséum National d'Histoire Naturelle in Paris, and museums across Germany, Russia, and Eastern Europe. Ireland alone has produced an extraordinary number of specimens, preserved by peat bogs that slowed decay. These fossils reveal individuals of different ages, sexes, and health conditions, allowing scientists to reconstruct growth patterns, seasonal stress, and even injuries sustained during life. Some antlers show signs of breakage and repair, evidence of violent clashes during mating seasons. Others are perfectly preserved, frozen in time moments after being shed or lost. What began as curiosity and confusion slowly transformed into one of paleontology's most iconic case studies. Megaloceros was no longer a mystery beast or a misidentified elk. It was recognized as a symbol of deep time, a reminder that Earth once supported creatures far beyond the limits of modern experience, and that their disappearance left only fragments for science to decipher. Megaloceros was built on a scale that pushed the biological limits of what a deer could be. At full maturity, large males stood approximately 2.1 meters tall, at the shoulder taller than most adult humans, and stretched over 3 meters from nose to tail. Body mass estimates range between 450 and 700 kilograms, depending on region and individual size, placing Megaloceros among the heaviest deer ever to exist, rivaling or exceeding the largest modern moose. But it was the antlers that defined the animal and set it apart from every land mammal known to science. Fully grown males carried antlers spanning up to 3.65 meters, or nearly 12 feet, from tip to tip. These were not thin, spindly structures. Each antler was broad and flattened, with multiple tines projecting outward, forming massive palmate surfaces. The total weight of the antlers alone could exceed 40 kilograms, making them heavier than the entire skeleton of many modern deer species. Despite their size, the antlers were not crude or misshapen. Bone microstructure studies show they were densely vascularized during growth and reinforced along stress-bearing regions, allowing them to absorb and redistribute force during combat. Growth rings preserved in fossil antlers indicate rapid seasonal development, fueled by nutrient-rich diets during spring and summer. Once fully formed, the antlers hardened into formidable weapons used primarily during mating competition. The skull of Megaloceros reflects the burden of this extreme anatomy. The frontal bones were massively reinforced, with expanded attachment sites for neck muscles capable of supporting and maneuvering the antlers. Cervical vertebrae were enlarged and robust, especially in mature males, providing additional stability and strength. These adaptations suggest that Megaloceros was not slow or awkward, as once assumed, but fully capable of controlling its massive headgear. Its limbs were long, straight, and powerfully muscled, suited for sustained movement across open terrain. Joint surfaces indicate a gait adapted for walking and trotting rather than dense forest maneuvering. The hooves were broad and stable, ideal for mixed ground conditions ranging from frozen soil to soft steppe grasslands. Biomechanical modeling suggests Megaloceros could move efficiently over long distances, though likely at lower sprint speeds than smaller deer. Soft tissue does not, but reconstructions based on muscle attachment scars and comparisons with modern cervids suggest a thick neck, deep chest, and strong shoulders. The animal's posture would have been upright and imposing, with the antlers held high rather than drooping forward. This stance maximized visual display during mating seasons and reinforced dominance within herds. Sensory capabilities were consistent with large grazing mammals. Eye placement indicates wide peripheral vision, useful for detecting predators in open environments. Nasal cavity structure suggests a keen sense of smell, critical for locating mates and assessing rivals. Hearing would have been acute, though no more specialized than in modern deer. Some aspects of Megaloceros remain debated. Coat color and seasonal shedding patterns are unknown, though cold-adapted fur is strongly inferred from its Ice Age range. Mane-like neck hair has been proposed but lacks direct evidence. What is certain is that Megaloceros was not an evolutionary accident or a clumsy giant. Every element of its anatomy reflects balance, strength, and specialization, animal engineered by natural selection to thrive at the very edge of physical possibility. Megaloceros lived in a world shaped by ice, wind, and vast open space. During much of its existence, Europe and Western Asia were dominated by cold steppe and parkland ecosystems, a mosaic of grasslands, scattered shrubs, river valleys, and seasonal wetlands. Dense forests were limited during the coldest phases of the Ice Age, and this open terrain proved ideal for a deer whose survival depended on visibility, mobility, and display. Isotopic analysis of Megaloceros' teeth reveals a diet dominated by grasses and herbaceous plants rather than woody browse. This places it firmly among grazing birds, feeding across open plains where nutrient-rich vegetation flourished during warmer months. Seasonal variation in tooth indicates shifts in diet as environments changed through the year, with tougher, drier grasses consumed during colder periods when plant diversity declined. Megaloceros was not a predator, but its size offered protection. Adult individuals were largely immune to most Ice Age carnivores, though young calves may have been vulnerable to wolves or large cats. The real pressures of survival came not from hunting, but from climate, competition, and reproduction. To sustain its immense body and rapidly growing antlers, Megaloceros required exceptionally high nutritional intake, particularly calcium and phosphorus. This dependence tied its success closely to stable, productive grassland ecosystems. Behavioral evidence suggests a seasonal rhythm similar to modern large deer. Males and females likely lived separately for much of the year, coming together only during the rut. Fossil antlers show extensive wear, breakage, and healed fractures, consistent with intense male-to-male combat. These were not gentle displays. The flattened, spreading antlers were designed to clash head-on, pushing, locking, and twisting as rivals competed for mating access. Injuries preserved in skeletons support this interpretation. Rib fractures, puncture wounds, and healed limb damage indicate frequent physical conflict. Some individuals survived severe trauma, suggesting a robust physiology and access to resources that allowed recovery. Others likely died from injuries sustained during the rut, where the cost of dominance was sometimes fatal. Social structure is inferred from fossil distribution rather than direct evidence. Groups of individuals of similar age found together suggest herd behavior, at least seasonally. During migrations or harsh winters, Megaloceros may have formed loose aggregations to exploit grazing areas and reduce individual predation risk. Calves likely remained with females for extended periods, growing rapidly to escape vulnerability. A typical day for Megaloceros would have been defined by movement and feeding. At dawn, individuals would graze across open plains, covering large distances to meet their dietary needs. Rest periods likely occurred during midday, followed by renewed feeding in the afternoon. Constant awareness of surroundings was essential, not because predators were a frequent threat, but because competition and environmental stress demanded vigilance. Tracks have not been conclusively identified, but limb anatomy indicates steady, ground-covering movement rather than quick turns or dense forest navigation. Megaloceros was built for endurance, not agility. Its dominance came from scale and presence, not speed. The antlers, while central to reproduction, also shaped daily behavior. Maneuvering through terrain required awareness of space, reinforcing the preference for open habitats. Seasonal shedding of antlers would have temporarily reduced energy demands, but regrowth placed extreme physiological strain on males. Year after year, Megaloceros thrived for tens of thousands of years by maintaining this balance between size and efficiency, display and survival, dominance and dependency. But this balance was delicate. As Ice Age environments shifted, the very traits that defined Megaloceros would become increasingly difficult to sustain. For much of the Ice Age, Megaloceros endured. It survived repeated climate swings, advancing glaciers, and shifting ecosystems for hundreds of thousands of years. Its lineage emerged around 400,000 years ago and persisted across multiple glacial cycles far longer than many other large mammals of its time. This was not a fragile species on the brink of failure. Its extinction, therefore, demands explanation. The disappearance of Megaloceros occurred near the end of the last Ice Age, roughly between 11,700 and 7,700 years ago, depending on region. Radiocarbon dates show that populations vanished earlier in Western Europe and later in eastern regions, with the final known individuals surviving in parts of Siberia into the early Holocene. This staggered timeline is critical. It suggests a gradual collapse rather than a single catastrophic event. One leading factor was climate-driven habitat change. As the Ice Age ended, Europe underwent rapid warming. Open steppe and grassland environments gave way to expanding forests dominated by birch, pine, and later dense hardwoods. For a grazing specialist dependent on wide open spaces and mineral-rich grasses, this transformation was devastating. Isotopic evidence indicates declining dietary quality in late Megaloceros populations. Consistent with nutritional stress, the antlers, once a symbol of evolutionary success, became a liability under these new conditions. Forested landscapes restricted movement and reduced the effectiveness of large visual displays used in mating. More importantly, shrinking grasslands meant fewer minerals necessary for antler regrowth. Studies of late-stage fossils show reduced body size and thinner antlers, signs of long-term resource scarcity. Human pressure likely compounded these stresses. By the time Megaloceros populations were declining, modern humans were widespread across Europe and Asia. Archaeological sites show that humans hunted large deer species, and cut marks on some Megaloceros bones confirm that it was occasionally butchered. While there is no evidence of mass overhunting, even low levels of human predation could have had outsized effects on a slow-reproducing species. Already under ecological strain, the extinction pattern of Megaloceros mirrors that of several other large Ice Age herbivores. Prolonged stability followed by rapid decline as climate change and human expansion overlapped. This combination, rather than a single cause, best explains its disappearance. Megaloceros was not outcompeted overnight, nor was it driven extinct by one hunting culture. It faded as its world narrowed. By the early Holocene, the last herds vanished quietly. No dramatic final stand, no sudden collapse recorded in the fossil record, just absence. The species that once carried the largest antlers ever grown by a land mammalian animal that reshaped landscapes through its sheer presence was gone. In its place stood forests, farms, and eventually cities. Megaloceros had dominated Ice Age Europe for tens of thousands of years. Its extinction marked not only the end of a species, but the closing of an entire ecological chapter, written in bone, ice, and grass. If Megaloceros had survived into the modern world, it would immediately rank among the most disruptive large mammals on Earth, not because it was aggressive, but because its biology was built for a planet that no longer exists. The question is not whether humans would notice it. The question is whether it could survive us. From a purely biological standpoint, Megaloceros could not thrive in most modern European landscapes. The open, mineral-rich grasslands it depended on have largely been replaced by forests, agriculture, and urban development. Its grazing specialization and extreme nutritional requirements, the need for calcium and phosphorus to regenerate massive antlers each year would limit it to carefully managed reserves or expansive steppe environments, such as parts of Central Asia. Even there, survival would be precarious. Modern ecosystems are fragmented by roads, fences, and settlements. An animal with a 12-foot antler span would face constant injury risk in confined spaces. Collisions with infrastructure, entanglement, and habitat bottlenecks would make natural migration nearly impossible. Unlike bison or red deer, Megaloceros could not simply adapt by shrinking its range. Its size demanded space. Human response would be immediate and complex. Conservationists would push for strict protections, recognizing Megaloceros as a living relic of the Ice Age. Its presence would be biologically priceless and symbolically powerful. At the same time, the animal's size would generate fear. Crop damage, vehicle collisions, and competition with livestock would create pressure for population control. History shows that even protected megafauna struggle under such tensions. Poaching would be an unavoidable risk. Antlers of that size would be among the most valuable wildlife trophies on Earth. Even shed antlers, which Megaloceros naturally dropped each year, would fuel illegal markets. Strict enforcement would be required to prevent exploitation, an effort that has proven difficult even for far smaller species. Ecologically, Megaloceros could reshape landscapes where it survived. As a heavy grazer, it would suppress woody plant growth and promote grassland expansion, much like large herbivores once did across prehistoric Eurasia. In carefully managed rewilding scenarios, it might restore lost ecological functions, but such balance would require constant human oversight, ironically tying the survival of this Ice Age giant to the species that once contributed to its extinction. Would Megaloceros dominate again? No, not in a world governed by roads, borders, and climate change. Its biology was optimized for abundance, not constraint. In the modern era, its extreme specialization would likely accelerate its decline rather than secure its success. And that is the final lesson Megaloceros offers. Evolution can produce wonders beyond imagination, but it does not guarantee permanence. The same traits that elevate a species to dominance can become liabilities when the world changes. Megaloceros does not haunt us because it was strange or monstrous. It haunts us because it was magnificent, because its disappearance reminds us how narrow the margin between supremacy and extinction truly is.